Hey everybody, Rick Valenza here with the Financial Zen Group, bringing you your Financial Zen tutorial. Have you ever taken one of those personality tests? Don't you just love getting the results back and learning about yourself? I just think those are so interesting. Well, there's an equivalent of those personality tests in the investment world, and that is your risk assessment. What the risk assessment does for you is it tells you exactly what kind of investor you are, exactly how you're most comfortable managing your money, and that also tells us, therefore, what you can expect in terms of long-term average returns. Now, some of you have completed your risk assessment for me. Some of you have not. So if you have, then this will just be a good refresher for when we do your annual update. If you haven't, then hopefully this will encourage you and empower you to complete it. It only takes 5 minutes tops for you to think through, and it's something that corresponds and directly affects everything that we do in terms of your investments, okay? So let me show you exactly how it works. You would have received an email with a link. When you click the link, it comes to a page like this. John is a pretend client of mine, and it says, welcome, John. We got a few questions. So it just asks John to drill into a few of his financial goals. Let's say John's top 3 priorities are retirement, college savings, and accumulating his wealth in general. It asks him for anything specific. Maybe John's worried about saving enough for retirement. All right. Well, I know what I meant. Okay. Let's say John is turning 41 this year, and let's say he wants to retire at a normal retirement age of 65. Okay, and then finally, let's say John has $500,000 to invest. Now, before we go on, I want to point out that this risk assessment is only for your long-term money. So when you're going through it, you only want to think about your long-term money, money that you don't need for 10, 20, 30 years, right? Your retirement funds, your college savings if your children are young. Anything that you need in the short term, like an emergency fund or maybe a down payment on a house, is going to be invested conservatively, right, with a focus on preserving the capital, right? It's not in the markets. It's not on the roller coaster ride. So this is only for your long-term money. So keep that in mind as you're going through it. So now we get into the meat of the exercise, and it pops up here, and it says, how much risk can you handle in the next 6 months? It says over the next 6 months, you're comfortable risking $62,000 for a possible gain of $62,000. So up or down 12%. So let's say John says, "Oh, that's a little bit more than I can be comfortable with. I'm gonna hold that. I'm gonna take that slider down and say I'm okay with up or down, 6%, right? Up or down 28%." Or let's say that John's maybe a little bit more aggressive, and he's okay taking on more potential loss for an equivalent potential higher gain. So for our sample purposes, let's just assume John's right in the middle, up or down 12%. And so he would click next. Then we're just going to drill down into exactly, sort of double check that initial assessment. So it's going to say, what if we can improve that? What if John could take less risk, but for the same amount of reward? So in this case, instead of being down 12%, he'd be down 8%, but he'd still have that positive potential 12% upside. Or on the other hand, maybe he would rather keep the same amount of risk for potentially more reward. So let's say that's his choice this time around. He clicks there. Then it drills down a little bit deeper and it says, well, what if we could take on just a little bit more risk for just a little bit more reward? John says, yeah, that sounds good. Okay, let's do that. And then we get to the final option and it says, what if we take on even more risk, but for even more reward? Now it says that's a little bit more than I'm comfortable with. Let's stick with our last choice. And John scores a 70 on the risk assessment scale. Now I want to point out this risk number is as subjective as what is your favorite color. There is no right or wrong answer to any of these. It is completely subjective to what you're comfortable with. So John's 70 risk number is right for John. Susie's 50 risk number is right for Susie. There's no right or wrong. Now, the way that we'll then use this risk number is this tells us that John is comfortable up or down 15%, down 15% or up 23%. That's going to happen 95% of the time. So 95% of the time throughout history, the way that we would invest this money with the 70 risk number, it's going to be in between that comfort zone, and only 5% of the time it'll be outside. Okay. And then what we'll do is I'll get notification when John has completed this. I'll see that John scored a 71, and that means I will, any money that I manage, I will put him into a moderately aggressive portfolio, which corresponds with a 70 risk number, and we'll use that as the anchor, right, as the blueprint for all of his long-term investment portfolios. Okay, so his 401k at work, his college savings if his children are young, all his IRAs, right, anything else that he doesn't need for 10, 20, 30 years. And that will be how we invest that money. And then we'll update that on an annual basis just to make sure that we're staying on top of things, and things that have happened in John's life don't affect his risk, his ability to take risk. All right, so I wanted to keep it short and sweet. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. I really appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned a thing or two, and hopefully this encouraged you to complete your risk assessment and learn a little bit about yourself. All right, thanks for watching, everybody.